It is easy to complain about how difficult, complicated, or illogical a language is. All languages are difficult, complicated, and illogical when you don't learn them as a kid. But there is one aspect of English that is really quite simple compared to many other languages around the world. It is that English languages don't have gendered nouns. Many languages, like Portuguese, have masculine and feminine nouns. For example, the word fork in Portuguese is garfo. This is a masculine word, so it ends in the O sound. In contrast, knife is faca, which is feminine and so ends in the A sound. It's a bit more complicated than this, but you get the idea. Any articles or adjectives that you use with these nouns also have masculine and feminine forms, and must agree with the noun. Why is garfo masculine and faca feminine? I have no idea. There is nothing about a fork that makes it feel masculine to me, just as there is nothing about a knife that is obviously feminine. They just are that way in Portuguese. But it gets worse. The German language has 3 genders, with neuter joining masculine and feminine. Grammatical gender versus natural gender. It's important to distinguish between grammatical gender and natural gender. Natural gender is simply the gender of a person, animal, or character. Grammatical gender is a way of categorizing nouns. It doesn't necessarily match up with the natural gender of the person or object being described. In some languages, grammatical gender is more than just male or female. Some languages have a neuter class, while others have different genders for animate versus inanimate objects. Languages also have different ways of assigning gender. Some languages go by the physical characteristics of the object in question. Often, mythology and cultural views on gender come into play too. For example, in the Alemblak language of Papua New Guinea, the masculine gender includes things which are tall or long and slender or narrow. Meanwhile, the Zande language of Africa divides nouns into 4 genders: masculine, feminine, animal, and inanimate. However, some inanimate objects that are important in Zande mythology are classified as animate. Other languages assign gender based on the ending of the word. For example, Spanish words that end in A are usually feminine. That's why la mesa is feminine even though a table doesn't physically have a gender. Why divide nouns by gender? Why do gendered languages exist? After all, English does perfectly well without assigning feminine and masculine characteristics to objects that lack genitalia. Actually, English used to be a gendered language too. English speakers stopped classifying most nouns by gender during the Middle English period. Basically, gender in languages is just one way of breaking up nouns into classes. In fact, according to some linguists, grammatical gender and noun class are the same thing. It's an inheritance from our distant past. Researchers believe that Proto-Indo-European had 2 genders, animates and inanimates. It can also, in some cases, make it easier to use pronouns clearly when you're talking about multiple objects. So why doesn't English have genders? Well, it does, a little bit. We have 3 gendered pronouns, the he, she, and it. We also have a few nouns that are generally considered to be male or female. For example, we normally talk about boats as if they were female. And this gives us a clue into the origins of English. You see, if you go back to Old English, the English that existed from about the 5th century until the 11th century, you will see that English did have gendered nouns. This kind of makes sense. English is, after all, a Germanic language, and we have already seen that German has 3 genders. So the question is not, why does English not have gendered nouns? The question is, why did English lose its gendered nouns? There are 2 theories. The first one is related to pronunciation patterns. The second, more exciting one, is related to the Vikings. Yes, that's right, our old friends the Vikings are making a comeback. First, the pronunciation theory. English usually places the stress at the start of a noun. If it is a long noun, the stress is usually in the first couple of syllables. There are exceptions, but this is the general tendency. This means that the sounds at the end of the nouns become less important and unstressed. Over time, these sounds might even disappear completely. The way English showed gender was to add a sound to the end of a word, like the O or A that we mentioned earlier when talking about Portuguese. If it is true that the sounds at the end of words in English become less important, then there is a good chance that the masculine and feminine endings could have disappeared because they would not be noticeable and so would no longer be important. And now we welcome the Vikings back. Well, not really welcome them. Did anyone welcome the Vikings? Anyway, you know what I mean. The Vikings had a huge influence on English. They started by raiding, which is quickly attacking and then leaving towns and cities. But after a while, they decided to stay and settle in England. They mainly lived in the north and the east of the country, but they traded with, married, and influenced most of modern-day England. The language of the Vikings was also from the Germanic family, and modern scholars think that the basic roots of most of the Viking words were similar to the basic roots of the Anglo-Saxon words. The main differences were in the endings of words. Let me give you an example. Let's imagine that there are two languages, language A and language B. The people who speak language A decide to go and live in the same area as the people who speak language B. The two languages are similar but not exactly the same. The word for dog in language A is gada, while the word for dog in language B is gadi. After a while of trying to communicate with each other, the speakers just decide it is easier to drop the final A or Y and agree that the word for dog is just God. So, by dropping the gendered endings of words, communication between two different language groups became much easier. They could now effectively and efficiently buy and sell from each other, declare undying love, and persuade kings and queens to do what they want. Personally, I have a feeling that it was a mix of the pronunciation effect and the desire for efficient communication that led to English dropping gendered nouns. There are people saying English is a much less sexist language than others because there is no gender involved. Firstly, we do still have some gendered endings. For example, some people still differentiate between a waiter and a waitress. This seems to be disappearing, but it still exists. Secondly, the way English is used is still sexist. From the words used to describe promiscuous men and women to the way people say female doctor, you rarely hear of a male doctor, to the assumption that men equals all people. However, this is more about the people using the language rather than the language itself. English and all languages are able to adapt depending on what the community of speakers wishes to express. If we nurture and create a less sexist society, the language will reflect this. In addition, the feminine genitive and the plural genitive were merging, while the plural dative had already merged with the masculine and neuter dative, and the instrumental was merging into the dative in all genders and numbers. This all made it to where the genders were no longer clearly distinguished, as there were now few iconic forms that sharply differentiated them with genderless forms now present. And for that matter, it was also starting to happen with the case and number system, causing the whole system to wind up breaking down, leaving us with just the most iconic form of them all, the. It seems the merging of numerous forms caused the information about what declension meant, what case, number, or gender to no longer be efficiently transmitted from generation to generation, causing the loss of those features and the emergence of our natural gender system based on pronouns, with the pronouns having already often been used that way, even before the breakdown of grammatical gender. And that wraps up the video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay notified about our uploads. I'll see you next time. Till then, peace out.